Welcome to the analysis of Some Ladies Dress in Muslin, Full and White by Christina Rossetti. So, in terms of context, it is important to note that this poem was written when Rossetti was younger, which might seem odd because of the way that she talks about women in fashion, but also might be symbolic because she was younger, she hadn't yet formed her full opinions on things. It is a disrupted Petrarchan sonnet, which could symbolise vanity as misplaced love. So the idea that the Petrarchan sonnet is supposed to be a love poem, but because there's that change in the traditional form, could suggest that the love isn't quite well formed because it's about vanity rather than romantic love, which could also suggest that this is a satire. So to begin with, we've got this anaphora of some repeated throughout this stanza, and this emphasizes the extent of vanity because it's repeated and it means that lots of people are doing it. However, the use of some could also be quite dehumanizing because it's not specific about what kind of people or what kind of ladies or which ladies are being spoken about, so it groups them together in this homogeneous collective of people who are just quite vain. The listing of fashions seems contemptuous, so she seems from the perspective that she's writing in that she doesn't agree with the way that this vanity is being flaunted, and she doesn't like the fashions that are part of the Victorian period. And you could make something of the fact that some ladies dressed in muslin, full and white could be deceitful. The idea of white being a symbol of purity. Are these women wearing white just to pretend that they're pure, actually to cover the fact that they're not? And also the idea of having the full skirt accentuates the figure, which links to Victorian values, the idea of the sexualization of the body. And the men are spoken about as wearing cloth succinct and black, and this could be a link to the dandyism that was quite popular in the Victorian period, where men were starting to really think about the things that they wore and wearing fancy clothes, and it seeming quite absurd to traditional people that men were this concerned with the way they looked. There's a semantic field of wealth with the idea of wearing muslin, of wearing black cloth, the idea of the carriages as well. So these are repeated temporal delights, and we know from our study of Rossetti that Rossetti really did not agree with temporal delights. She thought that your money and your love was better spent elsewhere than on material objects. Hack and Clarence are both carriages, and this is a satirical statement where she talks about the fact that some people worry about what kind of carriage to have. So she mocks this as being quite a frivolous way to spend your time. The regular alternate rhyme could emphasise the frivolity because it's quite a happy-go-lucky poem that people aren't really worried about much other than the way that they look, and I think the rhyme scheme really adds to that tone. In the second stanza, you could compare this with Passing and Glassing, because she talks about the fact that youth is not always such a pleasing sight, and that is similar to Passing and Glassing with the thought that perhaps as you get older you are more sensible and you're more wise, and actually younger people make poor decisions, and that seems to be where she is going here, even though she was only 18 herself. She comments on Victorian fashions, and she seems to be very critical of the subversion of gender roles. And we'll look at this more as we go through this particular stanza. So we talk about the men with tassels on his back, which first of all seems like an absurd image, to have tassels knocking about on your back, which makes it seem almost like you're wearing one of those old-fashioned saddles or something. So there's that aspect of absurdity, but also there's that feeling of this man perhaps being more effeminate or being more feminine than society would have expected him to be during the Victorian period. And remember that this was during the Victorian period where we had these gendered spheres, as you will see in Help Meet for Him. Men were expected to behave in one way, women were expected to behave in the other, and this was very much part of the way that people dressed as well. And this is continued with the idea of a woman wearing a great coat like a sack and towering above her sex. So this towering and being tall suggests masculinity. And this could link to queer theory, where masculinity was often associated with being homosexual. So perhaps this is what we're talking about here, that actually Rossetti has an issue with the way that clothes are used to represent sexuality, and maybe that's what her problem is. And the alliteration of the H on horrid height really emphasises her repulsion of these women who are wearing these types of clothes and their height. And in this stanza, where we talk about the water fit to drown, so this is her final stanza where she kind of gives her solutions satirically to what she wants to happen to these people, so all of these fashionable people. She talks about drowning them, and this links to the Noah's Ark story in Genesis, where they talk about the water fit to drown, where the sinners were drowned, so that's why the flood was sent to save the righteous. And maybe that's what she's saying should happen in Victorian England. Send a big flood, get rid of all the vain people, keep the righteous people. This could perhaps be argued to subvert the expectations of Christian morality, because is it very Christian to say let's drown all of the people who like to wear nice clothes? Or could this be a link to her age, the fact that she is quite young in her career, she's unwise to what she's saying? It's not entirely clear. There's a refocus on vanity, and it's interesting now that she chooses old ladies. Previously she's been fixated on younger people and the way that they dress, and I guess this shows that perhaps wisdom doesn't come with age. And the fact that these old ladies dress in girlish pink could link to passing and glassing in the way that they kind of disguise their age by wearing girly colours and try and seem younger than they are. And the roses and the geraniums that they choose to wear on their gowns have romantic associations, and this almost seems tragic because they're trying to recapture their youth. However, she returns to her idea of drowning people when she says, go to the basin, poke them over the rim. So the basin is a reference to baptism, and that's what was used in baptism. So it could be, again, like Noah, a cleansing ritual to rid society of these vain people. And there's a disrupted rhyme scheme at the end, so rim doesn't rhyme in the same way that the other lines have rhymed, which could suggest that this is unsettling. So because she's made this very bold statement about how we should get rid of all these people who are vain, that might be why there is a disruption to the rhyme scheme here, because it's quite shocking, the thing that she asks for. But it's also quite humorous as well, so I guess that's open to interpretation.